Today we leave the present behind and walk together through memories that are no longer our own. The dust of ancient civilizations settles on our skin, a fine powder of stories untold, as we step into the shadowed ruins of forgotten lives. The air hangs still and heavy, carrying scents of stone weathered by 1,000 years of rain and sun. Can you feel it? That gentle weight of history pressing against your senses as we begin our journey. If you feel this passage touching your night, consider joining us more often, and tell us where you're listening from. Now silence the world around you, dim the lights, and take a deep breath. We are about to dream of the past. I walk these corridors of broken stone, my fingers trailing along walls that once contained laughter, arguments, whispered secrets. The dust clings to my skin, each particle a fragment of stories that no one remembers anymore. It's strange how dust can be both insignificant and profound. Residue of life itself, the physical remains of days gone by, skin cells shed from bodies long returned to earth. In ancient Egypt, they believed dust contained spirits, tiny elementals that carried messages between worlds. Perhaps that's why I feel watched sometimes, standing alone in abandoned places where humans haven't lived for centuries. The sun filters through a collapsed ceiling, creating patterns on the floor that shift as clouds pass overhead. I've always found it comforting how ruins breathe. They expand in the heat of day, contract in the cool of night, stone groaning softly as it moves. Most people never notice this. They see only stillness, but I've slept among ruins often enough to feel their subtle movements, to hear their quiet conversations with the wind. I kneel and sift through a pile of debris in what might have been a kitchen once. My fingers discover something smooth among the rough fragments, a small clay oil lamp, its surface still bearing the faint impression of the maker's thumb. Such a simple object, yet when I close my eyes, I can almost see the flame it once held, dancing yellow-orange in darkness, illuminating the face of someone whose name has been lost to time. Did they read by this light? Mend clothing? Tell children stories before bed? Archaeologists at Akrotiri, the Minoan settlement buried by volcanic ash around 1600 BCE, found just such lamps preserved perfectly, their wicks still intact after 3.5 millennia. The eruption that destroyed their civilization came so suddenly that people left meals on tables, tools on workbenches, fresh paint on walls. An entire moment in time crystallized beneath layers of volcanic matter. I've often wondered if they had any warning. A tremor, perhaps, or unusual behavior from animals sensitive to the coming disaster. Did anyone escape to tell the tale? Or did their story end completely that day, waiting patiently beneath the earth until we stumbled upon it again? Outside, the wind picks up, whistling through empty doorways and broken windows. It carries the scent of wild sage that grows between the stones, reclaiming human spaces with patient determination. I've learned that ruins are never truly empty. They become habitats for lizards that bask in sun-warmed corners, owls that nest in high protected alcoves, mice that scurry through pathways we can't see. Life always returns, adapting and flourishing in the absence of our footsteps. I sit on a fallen column, smoothed by centuries of rain. The stone feels cool against my palms despite the afternoon heat. Few people know that many ancient ruins we envision as austere gray monuments were once painted in vibrant colors. Temples with bright red columns, blue ceilings mimicking the sky, golden accents catching sunlight. The Parthenon, that symbol of classical restraint, was once a riot of color that would shock modern sensibilities. Time and weather have stripped away these layers, leaving us with a false impression of the past, a muted version of what once was. As the day grows later, shadows lengthen across the ground like dark fingers reaching toward me. In this half-light, It becomes easier to imagine echoes of the people who once lived here. The daily routines, the celebrations, the mundane moments that make up a life. Did they ever imagine someone like me would sit among the remains of their world, trying to piece together who they were from fragments left behind? Perhaps they would find it strange, this fascination we have with ruins, this reverence for decay. I collect a handful of dust and let it sift through my fingers, watching it catch the light as it falls. Each mote contains molecules that might once have been part of a wooden beam, a clay pot, a woven basket, or perhaps even the exhalation of someone's final breath. Matter is neither created nor destroyed, merely transformed. We are all breathing atoms that have existed since the beginning of time, participating in an endless cycle of becoming and unbecoming. As twilight approaches, the stones seem to gather the day's warmth around them like a blanket. The ruins take on a different quality in this in-between time. Not quite day, not quite night, when boundaries blur, and it becomes possible to believe that past and present might briefly touch. Maybe this is why I keep returning to these forgotten places, to stand at the threshold between what was and what is, listening for whispers that might drift across that impossible divide. What stories would these stones tell, I wonder, if they could speak? Would they remember the touch of the mason who shaped them, the weight of the roof they once supported, the countless footsteps that polished their surfaces? Or would they speak of longer spans of time, of shifting continents, of rock formed in ancient seas, of the patient work of water and wind that will eventually reduce them to sand? Perhaps there is wisdom in this longer view, a reminder that our urgent concerns are brief moments in the vast sweep of time. Night falls fully now, stars appearing overhead in constellations that would have been familiar to those who lived here long ago. In the darkness, the boundaries of the ruins become less distinct, blending with the landscape around them. It's easy to imagine that if I close my eyes and open them again, I might find the walls restored, the roof intact, the space filled with the sounds and sense of life being lived. But that moment never comes, no matter how many times I try. The past remains just beyond our reach, preserved in fragments we can hold but never fully understand. And yet, we keep trying, collecting pieces, telling stories, searching for connections across time. Maybe that's enough. This reaching toward what came before. This acknowledgement that we are part of something larger than ourselves. I brush the last of the dust from my hands and prepare to leave, knowing that tomorrow these stones will still be here, whispering their half-remembered secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. The taste of salt never leaves you once you've been at sea. It crystallizes on your lips, mingles with sweat on your brow, works its way into the fabric of your clothes until you can taste it with every breath. I stand on the weathered deck of this ancient vessel, feeling the gentle sway beneath my feet as waves push us forward. The Mediterranean stretches around us, a vast expanse of blue-green that changes mood with the weather and time of day. Right now, in early morning light, it seems almost benevolent, glittering with promises of distant shores. My hands grip the ship's rail, wood smoothed by generations of sailors before me. The grain beneath my fingertips tells stories of storms, weathered, of scorching sun, of salt spray that has gradually transformed this once living material into something that feels almost like stone. Salt preserves and transforms bodies, food, wood, even metal. The ancient Egyptians used it to mummify their dead, believing it would help carry souls into the afterlife. I've always found it fascinating how something so common could bridge the gap between mundane necessity and sacred ritual. The copper taste in my mouth reminds me of the cargo below deck. Row upon row of ingots, their surfaces dulled with age but still holding the distinctive reddish-brown hue that made them so valuable. Copper, The metal that changed civilization, that took us from stone tools to something more refined, more versatile. Before iron, before bronze even, there was copper, malleable enough to shape with stone hammers, durable enough to last generations. The sailors around me move with practiced efficiency, adjusting lines, checking the sail that billows. Above us, their skin is darkened by sun and weather, their hands calloused from years of rope and oar. They speak little, communicating in the shorthand of those who work together daily. One man catches my eye and offers a clay cup filled with wine diluted with seawater, a common drink among ancient Mediterranean sailors. The taste is strange to modern palates, briny, astringent, with an underlying sweetness from the grape. But there is something honest about it, this marriage of land and sea, cultivation and wildness. Few people know that Phoenician sailors, those master navigators of antiquity, developed a method of preserving water for long voyages using copper. Vessels. The metal's natural antimicrobial properties kept water potable for weeks longer than clay or wooden containers could manage. This seemingly small innovation allowed them to venture further, stay at sea longer, establish trade routes that would eventually connect civilizations from Spain to the Levant. I wonder if they understood the science of what they were doing, or if they simply observed the results and adapted accordingly. Below us, the water teems with life invisible from above. Ancient seafarers believed the depths housed creatures beyond imagination. Half human, half fish beings that could charm or destroy. Serpents large enough to wrap around entire ships. Lost cities where drowned souls continued their lives beneath the waves. There's a curious incident recorded in Pliny's Natural History about a gigantic squid that terrorized saltworks near Cadiz, with arms measuring 30 feet long. The creature reportedly stole salted fish regularly until watchmen finally killed it and brought its massive body to shore as proof. Modern scholars debate whether this was an actual encounter with a giant squid, a case of exaggeration, or perhaps even a clever tax evasion scheme by local fishermen. The horizon blurs where sea meets sky, a liminal space that seems to embody possibility itself. How many sailors throughout history have stared at that same line, wondering what waits beyond? Navigation before modern instruments required intimate knowledge of stars, currents, prevailing winds, the behavior of birds and fish, the changing colors of water that might indicate shallows or deep channels. This accumulated wisdom passed from generation to generation through stories, songs, and apprenticeship, rather than written manuals or charts. I taste salt again as spray from a larger wave catches me unexpectedly. It mingles with the lingering flavor of this morning's meal. Barley porridge sweetened with honey, dried figs, a piece of hard cheese. Simple fare that hasn't changed much in thousands of years. There's something profoundly connecting about eating the same foods that sustained people across millennia. The sharp tang of certain cheeses, the concentrated sweetness of dried fruit, the earthy complexity of honey. These tastes form bridges across time. A pod of dolphins appears alongside the ship, their sleek bodies arcing through the water with effortless grace. The sailors point and call to each other, their faces brightening. Dolphins have always been considered good omens by seafarers, their playful presence a sign of safe passage. Greek mythology tells of the god Dionysus being kidnapped by pirates, who discovered their mistake too late when he transformed the mast into a grapevine and turned the pirates themselves into dolphins, forever condemned to rescue sailors rather than prey upon them. I watch these creatures synchronize their movements with our vessel and wonder, do they remember this divine transformation somewhere in their collective memory? Do they still feel some ancient kinship with humans that draws them to our ships? The sun climbs higher, burning away the morning mist that had softened the edges of the world. Heat intensifies the scents around me. Tar used to seal the ship's seams, drying fish hanging from lines at the stern. Sweat and oil from the bodies of working men. The peculiar mineral smell of copper that seems to grow stronger as the day warms. These scents mingle with the ever-present salt to create a perfume unique to ancient sea trade, a fragrance that has largely vanished from our modern world of steel containers and diesel engines. As we sail toward the hazy outline of a distant shore, I consider how maritime trade shaped human history far more profoundly than land routes ever could. Ideas traveled faster by sea, spreading between civilizations that might never have connected otherwise. Technologies, agricultural techniques, religious concepts, artistic styles, all followed the wake of trading vessels like invisible cargo, transforming societies in ways that physical goods alone never could. Perhaps this is why islands and coastal regions often developed unique cultural blends, becoming crucibles of innovation simply through their position at the crossroads of sea routes. The copper in our hold will soon become tools, weapons, jewelry, currency, objects that will outlive their makers by thousands of years. Some pieces might eventually be excavated by archaeologists who will analyze their composition to determine origin, trading patterns, metallurgical techniques. Will they be able to sense the human stories embedded in these ingots? The miners who extracted the ore, the metalworkers who refined it, the merchants who traded it, the sailors who transported it? Or will these personal narratives remain forever submerged beneath the objective facts of material and manufacture? My fingers remember what my mind has never known. They move across the wooden loom with practiced precision, finding patterns in the warp and weft that I couldn't consciously describe. The shuttle passes back and forth with a rhythmic clack that becomes a meditation, a heartbeat marking time in this dimly lit workshop. I feel the rough texture of undyed wool against my skin, the occasional resistance when a thread catches or tangles. This is ancient knowledge living in my hands, passed down through generations of weavers whose names have long been forgotten. The workshop is quiet now, early morning light filtering through small windows set high in stone walls. Dust motes dance in the beams, swirling with each breath I take. There's a particular scent to places where textiles are made, the lanolin from raw wool, the subtle fermentation of plant dyes steeping in copper pots, the earthiness of flax soaking to separate fibers from stalks. These smells have permeated the wooden beams above me, the stone floor beneath, creating a perfume that has remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. I pause to rub my aching fingers, noticing the calluses that have formed precisely where the threads press most often. Weaving shapes the body as surely as it shapes the cloth. My shoulders have grown strong from the repetitive motions, my eyes keener at spotting irregularities in the pattern, my fingers sensitive enough to detect variations in tension that would be invisible to others. Ancient textile workers often develop distinctive skeletal markers. Archaeologists can identify centuries later specialized wear patterns on finger joints, particular formations in shoulder and back vertebrae, even changes to teeth from using them as tools in the weaving process. The earliest evidence of woven textiles dates back an astonishing 27,000 years. Impressions of woven materials found in clay at Dolní Věstonice in what is now the Czech Republic. Those ancient hands worked without the loom that stands before me, perhaps using simple frames or even just carefully arranged threads weighted with stones. I try to imagine the first person who discovered they could interlace plant fibers to create something stronger, more flexible, more useful than the individual strands. Was it a moment of brilliant insight, or more likely, a slow evolution of technique developed through generations of trial and error? Few people realize that weaving fundamentally shaped human thought. The intricate patterns created by interlacing threads at right angles required mathematical thinking, long before formal mathematics existed. The binary logic of over-under that creates fabric may have influenced early computation. The jacquard loom of 1804, with its punched cards controlling which threads would be raised or lowered, directly inspired the first computer designs. Every time we speak of the fabric of society, the threads of a story, or weaving a tale, We pay unconscious homage to this ancient craft that gave us not just clothing and shelter, but metaphors for understanding our world. I reach for a small wooden box beside me, opening it to reveal a collection of bone tools polished smooth from years of use. My fingers select a thin, pointed piece for teasing out knots without breaking threads. It might have belonged to my teacher, or her teacher before her, or perhaps it dates back even further. The oldest weaving tools we've found, bone needles, with carved eyes, date back 50,000 years, predating agriculture by tens of thousands of years. We were creating textiles long before we grew our own food. The wall beside my loom is hung with small clay pots containing dyes. Indigo extracted from woad leaves, crimson from madder root, yellow from weld flowers, deep purple from mollusk, shells. Each color represents knowledge accumulated across generations, which plants to harvest and when, how to prepare the fibers to accept the dye, which mordants will make the color fast against sunlight and washing. The production of Tyrian purple, that regal shade extracted from the Murex trunculus sea snail, was so labor-intensive that it became worth more than its weight in gold. 10,000 snails yielded just 1 gram of dye, enough to color the trim of a single garment. The secret of its production was so closely guarded that when Constantinople fell in 1453, the knowledge was nearly lost forever. Outside, I hear the city beginning to wake, voices calling, animals being led to pasture, the first customers arriving at the market. But here in the workshop, time moves differently, measured in the slow growth of cloth under my hands, rather than the passage of sun across the sky. A good weaver might produce just inches of fine fabric in a day's work. The magnificent tapestries that hang in palaces and cathedrals represent years, sometimes decades of labor. Thousands of hours of human lives transformed into color and texture. I return to my work, fingers finding their rhythm again. The pattern emerging beneath my hands tells a story without words. Geometric shapes that represent mountains, rivers, the cycle of seasons. In cultures without written language, textiles often served as records, preserving histories, genealogies, and astronomical observations in their designs. When Spanish conquistadors destroyed Maya codices, believing them to be works of the devil, women continued weaving traditional knowledge into huipil blouses and ceremonial cloths, preserving cultural memory that would otherwise have been lost forever. Most weavers throughout history were women, their essential work often undervalued despite providing one of life's necessities. A medieval English woman might spend every available moment spinning, while walking, talking, even in dim evening light when other work became impossible, just to produce enough thread for a family's needs. The spindle became so synonymous with femininity that our words for unmarried women, spinster in English, spinne in German, directly reference this endless labor. I sometimes wonder, if men had been the primary textile producers throughout history, would we view the craft differently? Would museums display ancient fragments with the same reverence given to weapons and monuments? The cloth grows slowly beneath my hands, each pass of the shuttle adding another line to this unspoken story. There's a peculiar intimacy to creating, something that will touch human skin, that will witness moments both ordinary and extraordinary in someone's life. This simple length of fabric might become a child's first swaddling clothes, a bride's veil, or eventually, a shroud. Textile fragments have been found in graves from every culture and era, testament to our deep belief that we should enter the afterlife clothed in human handiwork. As morning advances, other weavers begin to arrive, taking their places at neighboring looms. We work mostly in silence, the rhythmic sounds of our shuttles creating an unplanned harmony. Our hands remember what history books forget, that civilization rests on a foundation of cloth as surely as it does on agriculture or writing. From the grandest palace to the humblest dwelling, human life has always been wrapped in the patient work of unknown fingers, weaving the invisible into something we can touch, wear, and pass down through generations. Night has always been the true kingdom of libraries. I move silently through towering shelves, my candlelight casting long shadows that dance across ancient spines and yellowed pages. The air is heavy with the distinctive scent that only old books possess, a complex perfume of leather bindings, paper slowly oxidizing, dust settling in forgotten corners, and the faint mushroom-like aroma of foxing spreading across untouched pages. It's the smell of time itself, compressed between covers and preserved in darkness. My fingers trace the embossed titles as I pass, feeling the indentations where scribes and bookbinders pressed their tools centuries ago. The texture tells stories that words cannot. How deeply the letters were impressed reveals the strength of the craftsman's hand, while irregular spacing might indicate work done by candlelight as daylight failed. Each volume carries not just the knowledge within its pages, but the physical memory of its creation. The Alexandria Library once held over 500,000 scrolls, the largest collection of knowledge in the ancient world. But what fewer people know is that each scroll required meticulous care. Papyrus and parchment needed to be unrolled and re-rolled periodically to prevent brittleness, checked for insect damage, and treated with cedar oil to repel moths. An army of anonymous librarians performed this endless maintenance, their names lost while the famous scholars who used the collection are still remembered today. I sometimes wonder if those forgotten custodians understood that they were preserving wisdom that would outlive them by millennia. The floor creaks beneath my feet as I reach the oldest section of the collection. These volumes rarely see daylight, their fragile bindings too delicate for casual handling. I carefully select one and bring it to a reading table where my candle throws a warm circle of light. The book opens with a whispered protest of leather and glue that has held its secrets for 400 years. The scent intensifies, a musty, slightly sweet aroma released from pages that haven't been disturbed in decades. My fingertips detect the subtle texture differences in the paper, the places where the pulp was slightly thicker or thinner in the original sheet, the occasional hair or fiber that found its way into the vat during production. Handmade paper captures the physical world in ways machine-produced materials never can. I've seen pages that preserved flower petals pressed centuries ago, strands of a scribe's hair caught in binding glue, fingerprints and ink from long-dead hands. These unintentional relics feel more intimate than any deliberate message. The sound of rain begins outside, droplets tapping against high windows like impatient messengers seeking entry. The rhythm changes the atmosphere in the library, creating a cocoon of sound that deepens the sensation of being suspended outside normal time. Ancient libraries often placed reading rooms at their centers, surrounded by the collection itself, creating spaces where external sounds were muffled by thousands of volumes absorbing vibrations. Architects understood that true study requires a certain quality of silence, not an absence of sound, but a presence of stillness that allows the mind to focus entirely on the dialogue with absent thinkers captured on the page. One of history's most curious library guardians was Ibrahim al-Shaybani, a 9th century bibliophile who collected so many books that his house in Baghdad could no longer contain them. Rather than part with his treasures, he simply moved out, transforming his entire home into a library where scholars could freely come to study. He lived in a small tent in the garden, surrounded by the overflow of manuscripts that wouldn't fit inside. When asked why he would surrender his comfort for books, he reportedly answered, "They keep me company in solitude, and I never feel alone in their presence." I turn a page carefully, aware that the oils from my skin could damage the delicate material. The illuminated capital letter at the chapter's beginning glows with gold leaf that somehow retains its brilliance after centuries in darkness. The unknown artist who applied this gold used techniques developed in medieval scriptoria, breathing gently on the adhesive to provide just enough moisture for the metal to adhere properly. This intimate connection between breath and creation always moves me. How many forgotten breaths are preserved in the books surrounding me? How many exhalations transformed into permanent beauty. Midnight approaches, bringing a deeper quality of silence. The library feels most alive at this hour, when the outside world retreats and the accumulated weight of human thought seems to press down from the shelves. There's a particular quality to the darkness between bookshelves, a textured darkness that feels almost liquid, flowing around islands of lamplight. In ancient times, libraries employed night scholars whose eyes had adjusted to working in minimal light to conserve expensive oil and candles. These nocturnal custodians developed remarkable abilities to navigate vast collections using touch and memory, knowing the location of thousands of works by the feel of their bindings alone. I've often wondered if books absorb something of their readers over time. Do the thoughts, emotions, and insights of everyone who has turned these pages somehow imprint themselves in the physical object? Is that why certain ancient volumes seem to radiate a presence that goes beyond their material components? The Picatrix, a medieval grimoire of astrological magic, instructs readers to place important books under their pillow to absorb their wisdom during sleep. Perhaps our ancestors understood something about the relationship between knowledge and objects that our digital age has forgotten. The candle gutters as a draft finds its way through some unseen crack in the walls. Shadows leap and then settle, again momentarily transforming the familiar space into something unknown. This interplay of light and dark reminds me of the human mind itself, how understanding illuminates small areas while vast regions remain in shadow. Every library is simultaneously a testament to human knowledge and a reminder of its limitations. We preserve what we can capture in words, but how much wisdom has been lost because it resisted language, existing instead in the realm of direct experience, intuition, or embodied practice. I close the book gently, allowing my hand to rest on its cover for a moment longer. There's a melancholy in knowing that I cannot possibly read every volume surrounding me, that most of the knowledge gathered here over centuries will remain unexplored by any single mind. And yet there's comfort too, in being part of this greater continuity, this silent conversation across time that continues whether any particular individual participates or not. The library breathes around me, patient as, always, custodian of voices that speak from the past into an unknown future, waiting for ears ready to listen. The first warning of revolution is always a change in the air. I stand at the corner of a narrow street, watching morning light creep across cobblestones still wet from an overnight rain. The city is awakening, but there's a tension in its breath. Today, an electric quality that makes the hair rise on the back of my neck. Revolution has a scent all its own, a complex mixture of gunpowder and sweat, ink from hastily printed pamphlets, the yeasty aroma of bread that has suddenly become too expensive for ordinary people to buy. I move closer to a group gathering near the square, their voices low but urgent. Their clothes carry the smells of their various trades, the sharp tang of tanning chemicals, the floury dust of bakeries, the metallic notes of smithies and foundries. Working hands passing dog-eared, papers between them, the fresh ink leaving faint smudges on calloused fingers. The distinctive scent of printer's ink in revolutionary times was particularly pungent, a mixture of linseed oil, lamp black, and sometimes pine resin that clung to paper and skin alike. During the French Revolution, certain printers developed unique formulations that dried extraordinarily quickly, allowing pamphlets to be distributed while the ink was barely set. Recipients often went home with black-stained hands, unwitting advertisements of their political activities. Steam rises from a coffeehouse nearby, its windows already fogged with the breath of those inside. Coffee itself has fueled more political upheaval than perhaps any liquid besides alcohol, the stimulant that kept revolutionary minds sharp through long nights of debate and planning. In 18th century Paris, there were over 600 cafes where radical thinkers gathered to share dangerous ideas. The Ottoman authorities before them were so suspicious of coffeehouses that they employed spies specifically to eavesdrop on conversations over the bitter brew. believing the drink itself inspired seditious thoughts. Perhaps they weren't entirely wrong. There's something about the acrid aroma, the way it clears the mind and loosens the tongue, that seems perfectly designed for plotting the overthrow of established orders. A woman passes with a basket of flowers, violets and early roses that briefly cut through the urban smells with their sweetness. Even this seemingly innocent scent carries revolutionary memory. Marie Antoinette was famous for her signature perfume, a violet concoction created by her perfumer Jean-Louis Fargeon that became so associated with the Queen that during the Terror, wearing any violet scent was considered a potentially treasonous declaration of royalist sympathies. Scent became political, dangerous. After her execution, Fargeon destroyed his formulas rather than sell the Queen's personal fragrance to others. Some perfume historians have attempted to recreate it from written descriptions, but the exact scent that surrounded the doomed Queen has been lost to history. The crowd grows larger now, bodies pressing closer together. The smell of unwashed humanity intensifies in the warmth of the rising sun. Not unpleasant exactly, but primal, animal. A reminder that beneath our civilized veneer, we remain creatures of flesh and instinct. Historians rarely mention the olfactory reality of revolutionary crowds, but contemporary accounts often note the distinctive smell of masses gathered in public spaces. The French Revolution's notorious crowd scenes reportedly carried a particular fermented scent from the garlic-heavy diet of the working poor, mixed with leather, smoke from cheap tobacco, and the ever-present mud of Paris streets. These smells mingled with fear, sweat, excitement, and occasionally blood, creating an atmosphere that some witnesses described as intoxicating in its intensity. Smoke begins to rise from somewhere distant, bringing with it the acrid scent of burning wood and less identifiable materials. There's something visceral about the smell of a burning city, how it clings to hair and clothing, infiltrates lungs, remains in nostrils for days afterward. During the Paris Commune of 1871, when revolutionaries set fire to the Tuileries Palace, the smoke reportedly carried the distinctive scent of burning silk, as hundreds of elegant curtains and furnishings were consumed. Witnesses described it as a strangely sweet undertone beneath the sharper smells of burning wood and stone, a sensory epitaph for a vanishing world of privilege. I follow the crowd as it moves toward the central square, passing a bakery where the warm, yeasty scent of fresh bread spills onto the street. Bread shortages have sparked countless uprisings throughout history, the absence of this most basic sustenance acting as a catalyst for deeper grievances. During the Russian Revolution, the smell of proper bread became a memory, replaced by the sour odor of ersatz loaves made from mixtures of floor sweepings, straw, and bark. In times of scarcity, the sense of smell becomes sharper, more discriminating. People who lived through such periods often retained lifelong abilities to detect adulteration in foods that later generations, raised in abundance, couldn't perceive. The square itself is already half filled with people, their collective breath creating a cloud in the cool morning air. I catch the bitter tang of cheap tobacco, the sharp bite of spirits someone is drinking for courage despite the early hour. A man nearby smells of printer's ink and coffee, a woman of lye soap and the herbs she grows on her windowsill. Each person carries their own olfactory signature, a unique combination of occupation, class, habits, and the places they've recently been. I've often thought historians miss crucial understanding by focusing on what revolutionaries said rather than the sensory reality of their physical presence, how different classes smelled to each other, and how these scents influence perceptions and prejudices in ways that might never be consciously acknowledged. The first speaker climbs onto an improvised platform, and the wind shifts, bringing a new scent, the metallic note of freshly sharpened blades, the oil used to maintain weapons being carried concealed beneath coats. Revolution balances perpetually on the knife edge between idealism and violence, between the lofty perfume of new ideas and the copper stink of blood. I wonder, not for the first time, whether those who begin these movements ever truly understand what they're unleashing, or if they're always surprised by how quickly the scent of hope can sour into the smell of fear. Night falls on the first day of what will become either a footnote or a chapter in history books yet unwritten. The air is different now, heavy with wood smoke, sweat, spilled wine, the residue of strong emotions expressed without restraint. I sit at the edge of the square as the crowds finally begin to disperse, watching stars appear above buildings that may not stand much longer. The city holds its breath, waiting. Tomorrow will bring new smells, perhaps gunpowder and blood, perhaps flowers and celebration. In this moment between action and consequence, I catch the faintest scent of something I can never quite name, but always recognize, the peculiar fragrance of history as it happens, of moments when the world changes direction, following currents of human desire and rage and hope that flow beneath the surface of ordinary days, waiting for the moment to emerge. The weight of life and death rests differently in my hands than in others. I feel it as I grind herbs in the stone mortar, the rough texture of dried leaves breaking down into fine powder that releases its healing essence. My fingers know the work without my mind directing them, how much pressure to apply, when to add a drop of water, how to recognize the perfect consistency by touch alone. This knowledge lives in my skin more than my thoughts, passed down through generations of women who came before me, who learned as I did that a healer's most valuable instrument is not the knife or the needle, but the hand itself. Dawn is just breaking, sending pale light through the small window of my workroom. The air is already thick with scents, the sharp bite of vinegar steeping with rosemary and thyme, the earthy richness of comfrey root drying in bunches from the ceiling beams, the sweet bitter aroma of feverfew that always makes me think of sunlight, even in winter's darkness. Each plant carries its own signature, speaking to those who know how to listen. Motherwort whispers of heart troubles, while the peppery scent of yarrow calls out its power to staunch bleeding. I prepare for the day ahead, washing my hands in water infused with lavender, a ritual of purification that serves both practical cleanliness and spiritual centering. The water feels cool against my skin, beating on calluses formed by years of this work. Few realize that long before Joseph Lister advocated antiseptic procedures in 1867, midwives and traditional healers had empirical knowledge of cleanliness. They couldn't see the invisible world of microbes, but they observed the patterns of infection, noting how certain practices, like washing hands in herb-infused waters or scrubbing tools with vinegar, resulted in better outcomes for their patients. A knock at the door interrupts my preparations. The baker's wife stands there, face drawn with worry, describing her child's cough with the precision of a mother who has barely slept. I listen, but my diagnostic process relies on more than words. I note the slight tremor in her hands, the faint smell of fear that rises from her skin, the particular quality of exhaustion in her eyes. As she speaks, I begin selecting herbs from their jars, horehound for the cough, elderberry to fight the infection, a touch of honey to make the bitter medicine palatable to a child's tongue. The wooden shelves around me hold countless glass containers, their contents representing a pharmacy more sophisticated than most modern people realize. In the 17th century, when I practiced my healing arts, we don't have the vocabulary of active compounds and chemical constituents, but we understand through observation and inherited wisdom that willow bark relieves pain and reduces fever much as today's aspirin does. We know that foxglove strengthens a failing heart, though we call this dropsy medicine rather than digitalis. The boundary between empirical observation and what later centuries will dismiss as superstition is not as clear as history books suggest. A curious fact few historians acknowledge. During the height of Europe's witch trials, the mortality rate in communities that lost their wise women and healers to execution often rose dramatically in subsequent years. In the German town of Würzburg, after the execution of 42 midwives and healers in 1629, Infant mortality nearly doubled in the following decade. These connections were rarely documented because those who kept records, primarily churchmen and officials, viewed the deaths as divine punishment rather than the predictable outcome of losing vital healthcare providers. My fingers select dried calendula flowers, their vibrant orange faded to amber, but their healing properties still potent. The touch of them brings memories of summer harvests, of gathering at dawn when the dew still clung to petals, of careful drying in shadowed rooms where direct sunlight couldn't diminish their power. There's something profoundly intimate about this work, knowing that these plants I touched in life will touch the inner bodies of those who seek my help, that this transfer of energy moves from earth to plant to healer to patient in an unbroken circle. By midday, my small waiting area holds 3 more patients. A man with a festering wound on his forearm, an elderly woman whose joints ache with the changing weather, a young mother whose milk has dried too soon. Each brings their suffering to me, and each requires not just remedies, but touch itself. The pressure of my fingers finding the precise location of pain, the careful cleaning of wounds, the reassuring contact that communicates care when words fall short. Modern medicine has forgotten how healing touch itself can be, how the body responds to the focused attention of another human being. Studies in your time will rediscover what we have always known. That compassionate touch reduces stress hormones, lowers blood pressure, and strengthens immune response. The wounded man winces as I clean his injury with an infusion of yarrow and St. John's wort. The smell is medicinal, but not unpleasant, green and slightly sweet. He doesn't know that both plants contain compounds that fight infection and promote healing of tissue. He only knows that his grandfather's wound was treated similarly and healed cleanly. This oral history of remedies, passed through generations, preserved medical knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. When I apply a poultice of crushed garlic mixed with honey, he wrinkles his nose at the pungent smell but doesn't protest. The mixture will draw out infection better than many modern antibiotics, though neither of us has the language to explain why. As evening approaches, I prepare a delivery kit, knowing a messenger might arrive in the night. My hands check each item by touch. Smooth glass vials of ergot to stem hemorrhage, the rough texture of clean linen strips, the slick feel of oil infused with chamomile for easing a difficult birth. The village calls me witch, wise woman, healer, midwife, names that carry different weights depending on who speaks them and in what company. I am all of these and none of them, simply someone whose hands have learned to read bodies as others read books, interpreting the language of pulse and temperature, the subtle stories told by skin and breath and movement. Night falls, and I sit by the small fire, my day's work complete for now. The flames cast flickering light across my hands, hands that have welcomed new life into the world and eased the passing of those leaving it. Hands that have set bones and drained infections, mixed remedies and offered comfort. In the quiet darkness, I sometimes wonder, how much of what I know will survive me? Which remedies will be forgotten? Which understandings lost? Perhaps someday, healers will look back and recognize that amid our supposed ignorance, we held wisdom their science had yet to rediscover. I spread my fingers toward the warmth, watching shadows play across calloused skin. These hands connect me to an unbroken lineage of healers, stretching back to the earliest human communities, and forward into a future I cannot imagine. In this moment between what has been and what will be, I feel the weight of this knowledge as both burden and blessing. This intimate art of touch that has saved countless lives when science was still finding its first words. The bell tower feels alive beneath my hands, stone vibrating with anticipation before I've even touched the ropes. I've climbed these worn spiral stairs in darkness more times than I can count, my body knowing each uneven step, each place where the stone has hollowed from centuries of footfalls. 107 steps exactly. I counted them as a child when I first became apprentice to the bell ringer, and now my muscles remember the journey without thought. The air changes as I ascend, growing cooler, carrying the metallic scent of bronze and the earthy smell of ancient timbers that frame the massive bells above. Near the top, the first pale light of dawn filters through narrow windows, illuminating motes of dust that hang suspended in the still air. These particles have always fascinated me. How they seem to dance when disturbed by my passage, then settle back into their patient waiting. Some might be fragments of the tower itself, stone dust created when the bell's vibrations shake the mortar loose between blocks. Others could be remnants of previous ringers, their skin cells and breath becoming part of the tower's atmosphere. I like to imagine that something of every person who has pulled these ropes remains here, joining a fellowship that spans centuries. I reach the ringing chamber just as the horizon begins to blush with first light. Through the eastern window, I can see the town still wrapped in shadow, chimneys sending thin columns of smoke into the brightening sky. Soon these bells will break the silence, their voices traveling farther than any human sound could reach, telling those within hearing that another day has begun. Few people in modern times understand how bells once structured time itself, dividing days into hours of prayer, announcing markets and curfews, warning of dangers, celebrating births and marriages, mourning deaths. Before clocks became common, the sound of bells was how communities synchronized their activities, creating a shared temporal experience that bound people together. My hands grasp the ropes hanging from the ceiling, feeling their familiar texture. Slightly rough hemp worn smooth in places by generations of palms just like mine. The technique for ringing these massive instruments isn't about strength, but timing, using the bell's own momentum rather than forcing it. A curious fact about bell ringing. In English churches, the practice of change ringing developed in the 17th century, an intricate mathematical system where bells are rung in constantly changing sequences. A full peal of 5,040 changes on 7 bells takes over 3 hours to complete, with no sequence repeated. Bell ringers developed this complex system centuries before computers, creating what was essentially an early form of algorithmic thinking expressed through sound rather than numbers. I take a deep breath and pull the first rope. There's always a moment of resistance, then surrender as the bell begins its journey, swinging upward until it stands nearly upside down at the balance point. Then gravity takes hold, and it falls back, the clapper striking the side with a resonance that passes through the rope into my body. The sound itself is so enormous this close that it becomes more physical sensation than auditory experience. A pressure wave that expands outward from the bronze, vibrating through stone, wood, flesh, and bone. Each bell in this tower has its own voice, its own character. The oldest, cast in 1482 and weighing nearly a ton, produces a deep, solemn tone that seems to emerge from the earth itself. Local legend claims that when this bell was cast, the metalworker added silver coins to the molten bronze, believing it would create a purer sound. Metallurgists now know that small amounts of silver can indeed change the acoustic properties of bronze, though the effect is subtle. Whether this bell truly contains such treasure is impossible to know without destroying it, but its voice does carry a distinctive clarity that the others lack. The smallest bell rings with a bright, almost eager voice that cuts through the deeper tones. Cast in 1739 to replace one that cracked during a particularly enthusiastic celebration of a military victory, it bears the inscription, "I sing of time and eternity," in Latin letters that circle its waist. The bell founder who created it was renowned throughout the region, but a fire destroyed his workshop and records in 1742, leaving this bell as one of the few surviving examples of his craft. Sometimes I run my fingers over the inscription and wonder about the hands that formed those letters, the eyes that checked their alignment, the ears that tested the tone after casting. These bells connect me to craftsmen, long turned to dust, to a lineage of ringers stretching back centuries. As I establish the rhythm of the morning peal, My body falls into the familiar pattern. Pull, rise slightly on tiptoes as the bell swings, upward, then settle back as it falls and sounds. The physical discipline of bell ringing has its own meditative quality, demanding complete presence. A moment's inattention can result in a missed stroke, or worse, a rope wrapping around an arm, or neck with potentially fatal consequences. Accidents in bell towers were common enough that many old ringing chambers still contain painted warnings or grim poems about ringers who lost their lives to momentary carelessness. The vibrations travel through the ancient timbers of the belfry, causing small showers of dust and the occasional wood splinter to drift down from above. These massive oak beams supporting the bells were cut from trees that began growing in the 13th century, their rings containing a climate record of medieval summers and winters, of drought years and abundant rainfall. When the largest bell sounds, I can actually see the beam above it flex slightly with the force. Engineers who examined the tower during renovations marveled at the medieval builders' intuitive understanding of vibration and load, how they created a structure that has flexed with these powerful forces for centuries without failing. Outside, the town awakens to my ringing. Lights appearing in windows, smoke from morning fires increasing, the first movements in streets that were empty moments before. Bell towers create soundscapes that define communities, their acoustic reach marking the boundaries of belonging. In medieval times, the distance a parish bell could be heard often determined the effective border of that parish. People identified with the bell they could hear from their homes. During the German occupation of Belgium in World War I, church bells were often confiscated for their metal content, and communities reported feeling fundamentally lost without their familiar voices, as if part of their collective identity had been physically removed. The morning light strengthens as I complete the sequence, illuminating the ringing chamber fully now. Graffiti covers portions of the walls, names and dates left by ringers over centuries, the earliest visible inscription from 1598. I added my own modest mark when I completed my apprenticeship, continuing a tradition older than my family name. Some of these carvings are elaborate, bell designs, simple prayers, even crude jokes that remain funny across the centuries. One section of wall contains tick marks recording the duration of a storm in 1703 that prevented the ringer from leaving the tower for 3 days. History in its most intimate form, written by those whose names never appeared in official chronicles. The final notes hang in the air, overlapping harmonics creating a complex chord that slowly fades. In that lingering resonance, I always feel a curious sense of connection to every person in the town who just heard these bells, to every ringer who has stood where I stand, to every craftsman who shaped the metal that shaped these sounds. We think of history as something distant, preserved in documents and artifacts. But sometimes it's as immediate as vibrations passing through air, connecting bodies across time through experiences that remain fundamentally unchanged. I coil the ropes carefully and prepare to descend. The bells will sound again at noon, and again at evening, marking the day's progression as they have for centuries before my birth, and will continue long after I'm gone. In their patient iron and bronze voices, they seem to speak of time differently. Not as a resource to be spent or saved, but as a medium. We move through together, our individual moments joining the greater resonance of a shared human story. The quill feels alive between my fingers, an extension of my arm rather than a mere tool. I trim its tip with practiced precision, angling the knife just so, creating the perfect split that will allow ink to flow smoothly onto the page. There's an intimate relationship between a scribe and his instruments. The way the feather's hollow shaft fits perfectly against the webbing between thumb and forefinger. How its weight becomes so familiar that writing with any other quill feels immediately wrong, like wearing another person's shoes. Early morning light slants through the high windows of the scriptorium, creating pools of gold on the writing desks arranged in their neat rows. I've chosen my seat carefully, positioning myself where the light will remain good throughout the day. The room holds the particular silence of concentrated work. Not a complete absence of sound, but rather a texture woven from small noises. The soft scratching of quills across parchment, the occasional rustle of turning pages, the faint creaking of wooden chairs as their occupants shift position. If you listen carefully enough, you can even hear the sound of breath being held when a particularly delicate line is being drawn. The ink before me is my own mixture, made yesterday from oak galls harvested last autumn. The process is almost alchemical, crushing the galls to release their tannins, adding ferrous sulfate that turns the liquid instantly black when the components meet, incorporating gum arabic for proper flow and adhesion. The scent is distinctive, slightly metallic, somewhat acidic, with earthy undertones that remind me of forest floors after rain. This iron gall ink will darken further as it dries, eventually becoming the deep black-brown that characterizes manuscripts that have survived for centuries. What few people realize is that this same ink slowly eats through the parchment over decades, the acid gradually burning through the material it marks, our words literally consuming their foundation over time. I dip the quill and watch as ink fills the hollow shaft, then bring it to the parchment before me. The first touch always feels momentous, the meeting of liquid and surface, the beginning of marks that might outlive everyone in this room by centuries. The parchment itself carries its own history. Made from calfskin, it retains evidence of the animal's life, occasional follicle patterns, variations in thickness where the skin stretched differently, even faint blue traces of veins if you hold it to the light just right. Each sheet required careful preparation, soaking, scraping, stretching on frames, rubbing with pumice to create a surface smooth enough for the quill's delicate point. A single gospel book might require the skins of an entire herd. My hand moves across the page, forming letters with a rhythm developed through years of practice. There's a musicality to good writing, the balanced spacing between letters, the consistent angle of ascenders and descenders, the harmonious relationship between text and the space around it. I'm copying a philosophical treatise today, the words not my own, but passing through my mind, my hand, onto this surface where they will remain when both the original author and I are long forgotten. A curious feeling, to be the vessel through which ideas travel from one mind to another, from one century to the next. Few people today appreciate that medieval scribes often worked in almost complete anonymity. Despite spending thousands of hours creating books of extraordinary beauty, most never signed their work. Occasionally, in the margins of manuscripts, one finds small personal notes, complaints about cold rooms, stiff fingers, poor quality materials, or simply expressions of relief at completing a long project. My favorite is from an Irish monk who wrote in the margin of a difficult text, "Now I've written the whole thing. For Christ's sake, give me a drink." These rare glimpses of humanity behind the perfect letters remind us that each manuscript represents not just ideas but countless hours of physical labor by individuals whose names have largely vanished from history. The scriptorium grows warmer as morning progresses, the smell of beeswax candles mingling with ink and parchment. Despite the rule of silence, the room communicates in its own language. A grimace from Brother Thomas as he blots excess ink, a small nod of approval from the master scribe as he passes behind a novice, the slight straightening of shoulders that indicates someone has just made a mistake and is considering how to correct it. We work mostly in Latin, a language that feels different in the mouth than our everyday speech, its rhythms and structures requiring a particular kind of attention. Sometimes I dream in Latin, my sleeping mind continuing the work of translation and transcription. I pause to flex my fingers, feeling the familiar ache that comes from holding the quill at a precise angle for hours. The physical cost of writing is inscribed in scribes' bodies. The curved spine from bending over desks, the calluses on fingers, the eye strain from squinting at detailed work in varying light. Medical examination of skeletal remains from Medieval monasteries often reveals distinctive patterns of wear on finger joints and spine that identify the deceased as scribes, as surely as any documentation could. Our work marks us as permanently as we mark the parchment. The afternoon brings a subtle shift in the quality of light, shadows lengthening across the floor. I reach a passage about memory, and find myself considering how these words before me, copied perhaps dozens of times by different hands before reaching mine, carry the accumulated attention of everyone who has written and read them. The Latin word for to read, legere, originally meant to gather, as if reading were a harvest of meaning, a collection of someone else's thoughts into your own mind. And isn't writing a similar gathering of ideas, of words, of moments captured in the material form of ink and page? An unusual fact about medieval manuscripts. Scribes sometimes included deliberate errors in their work, believing that only God could create something perfect. These intentional imperfections, a backward letter, a minor misspelling, served as reminders of human limitation and protected against the sin of pride. I've never needed to introduce deliberate mistakes. My hands find ways to err without any conscious intention. Each time it happens, I must decide whether to correct by erasure, scraping away the ink with a small knife, or simply continue, acknowledging the flaw as part of the manuscript's unique character. As evening approaches, I finish the day's portion, carefully blotting the final lines and cleaning my quill. The completed page will dry overnight before receiving any illumination. Those colorful additions of red rubrics for emphasis, perhaps small illustrations in the margins, or elaborate decorated initial letters if the text warrants such embellishment. That work belongs to other hands than mine, specialists in color and design. My contribution is the foundation of words, the primary vessel for meaning. I stand and stretch, feeling vertebrae crack after hours of stillness. Looking back at the day's work, the careful rows of text, the even spacing, the consistent letter forms, I feel the particular satisfaction that comes from patient labor well executed. These words weren't born in my mind, and my name won't be remembered by those who read them centuries from now. But my hand, my breath, my attention, my very life essence has been woven into their transmission. In some small way, something of me continues with them, an anonymous presence behind each carefully formed letter, traveling forward into a future I will never see. Night has fallen across the desert, and the world transforms. The merciless heat that bent the air in waves just hours ago has retreated, leaving behind a coolness that makes my skin tingle with relief. I sit beside our small fire, watching shadows dance across the faces of my fellow travelers, merchants, pilgrims, guards, guides, each drawn to this ancient path for reasons as varied as the goods we carry. Above us, stars appear in impossible numbers, a glittering canopy that seems close enough to touch. The Milky Way forms a luminous road across the heavens, mirroring our own dusty trail below. This caravan has become its own small kingdom over the weeks of travel. 37 camels, 12 mules, 22 people from 6 different lands, all moving as a single organism across terrain that would kill any one of us alone. I've traveled this route between Damascus and Samarkand 7 times now, but the night sky in the desert never loses its power to humble me. The vastness above makes our journey, seemingly epic when viewed from the ground, appear as insignificant as the tracks of beetles in the sand. The scents of our temporary encampment mingle in the still air, simmering rice and lentils from the cooking pot, the musky odor of camels settling down for rest, leather oiled against the dry desert air, the faint sweetness of date wine someone has cautiously uncorked. After weeks together, I've learned to identify my companions by smell alone. The Indian spice merchant who carries the permanent aroma of cardamom and cloves in his clothes, the Persian scholar whose ink-stained fingers give off a metallic tang, the camel driver from Balkh who smokes a distinctive herb in his pipe each evening. "Share a story from your homeland," calls a voice from across the fire. This ritual has become our nightly entertainment and education. We trade tales like currency, each contributing to an invisible marketplace of ideas that flows alongside the physical goods in our packs. Tonight, a silk merchant from the distant eastern kingdoms describes a method for cultivating silkworms that his people have guarded for centuries. His words are translated twice before reaching my ears, yet something of their essential wisdom remains intact, passing between us like the ember that moves from one torch to another, the flame essentially unchanged despite the transfer. The Silk Road, which we travel a segment of, was never a single path, but rather a complex network of routes spanning over 4,000 miles, connecting China to the Mediterranean. What's less known is that these routes transported far more than physical goods. They carried technologies, religions, languages, and diseases. The Buddhist faith traveled these paths from India to China and beyond, while paper-making techniques moved westward, eventually reaching Europe and revolutionizing information sharing centuries before the printing press. Perhaps most consequential was the unintended cargo of bubonic plague, which followed these same trading routes to devastate populations across Asia, Africa, and Europe in the 14th century. I sip tea from a small cup, the liquid still hot enough to send steam rising into the cool night air. The vessel itself tells a story of cultural exchange. Its blue glaze technique originated in Persia. Its shape is distinctly Chinese, and the merchant who sold it to me 3 journeys ago was Armenian. Materials and ideas flow across boundaries, with a fluidity that political authorities can never fully control, creating hybrid forms that belong neither wholly to one culture nor another. A curious practice I've observed along our route, in certain caravanserais, those waypoints that provide shelter for travelers like ourselves, there exist memory rooms, where merchants leave messages for others who might pass through months or even years later. Walls are covered with notes written in dozens of languages, reporting conditions of roads ahead, warnings about dishonest officials at certain border crossings, or simply greetings to friends who travel the same circuit in different seasons. I've watched companions search these walls eagerly upon arrival, sometimes finding messages intended specifically for them, creating connections across vast distances and time without sender and recipient ever meeting face to face. The night deepens, and conversation gradually quiets. A woman from Alexandria begins to play a small, stringed instrument, its delicate notes seeming to rise toward the stars. She learned its music in Bukhara from a blind musician who claimed the melodies were ancient when his grandfather's grandfather was young. I close my eyes and wonder how many other ears across centuries have been soothed by these same patterns of sound. How many other travelers have paused their journeys to listen together under similar skies? Though we come from different lands and worship different gods, there is an unspoken understanding among caravan travelers that transcends language and custom. We have all felt the same sun on our faces, the same fear when water runs low, the same wonder at the vastness of landscapes humans were not designed to cross. These shared experiences create a temporary community more genuine than many I've known in settled places. Here, survival depends on cooperation, making trust not a luxury, but a necessity. When I return home, people often ask about dangers, bandits, storms, wild animals, but rarely about the knowledge exchanged around fires like this one. Yet in truth, ideas have always traveled faster and farther than any physical cargo. A spice can be consumed, a silk garment will eventually fray, but information replicates itself, taking root in new minds and growing in directions its originators could never predict. The true value of these routes lies not in what is carried in saddlebags, but in what moves between minds, meeting briefly before continuing in different directions. The fire burns lower now, embers glowing orange against the dark sand. Most of my companions have retreated to their sleeping mats, but I remain, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. An astronomer in Baghdad once told me that Light from these distant points began its journey to our eyes long before any of us were born. Some stars, he claimed, have already died, yet their light continues traveling through the vast darkness, still visible to us as though they remain. I find strange comfort in this, how influence outlives its source, continuing to illuminate paths long after its origin has faded. In 3 days, we will reach the next city, where some travelers will leave our caravan and new ones will join. Goods will be traded, information exchanged, relationships formed and dissolved. This constant flow of people and ideas along established routes creates a living network spanning continents, connecting communities that might otherwise never know of each other's existence. I have carried silk westward and returned eastward with glassware, but the most valuable cargo has always been the stories and knowledge gathered at each stop. Intangible treasures that weigh nothing in my packs, yet have immeasurably enriched my understanding of the world. As sleep finally approaches, I listen to the soft breathing of my companions, the occasional snort or shift of the camels, the whisper of wind moving sand in miniature drifts around our campsite. Tomorrow we continue our journey, adding another day's tracks to routes centuries old, participating in an exchange of goods and ideas that began long before any of us drew breath and will continue long after we are gone. Under these ancient stars, this knowledge feels not melancholy but reassuring. We are momentary participants in patterns of connection much larger and more enduring than ourselves. The garden whispers secrets that only patient souls can hear. I walk along overgrown paths where marble statues peer through curtains of ivy, their faces weathered by centuries of rain and wind, until their expressions have transformed from whatever the sculptor intended into something more ambiguous, more true. Morning mist still clings to shadowed corners, wrapping around forgotten fountains where water no longer flows. This place was once the pride of an empire, the living canvas of a botanist whose name now appears only in obscure academic journals. Today, nature reclaims what humans abandoned, writing its own story over the carefully planned designs of the past. My fingers brush against leaves still heavy with dew, plants whose ancestors traveled impossible distances to arrive here. That's the thing about gardens that most people forget. They are living museums of human ambition and exploration, collections of species gathered from across continents and replanted far from their native soil. This particular leaf beneath my hand belongs to a tree whose seeds were carried from southern China in the pocket of a missionary who never returned to his homeland. The journey cost him his life, one of countless unnamed collectors who died of fever, accident, or violence while seeking botanical treasures in distant lands. The soil beneath my feet is rich and dark, built up over generations of growth and decay. I kneel and take a handful, bringing it to my face to inhale its complex aroma. The scent of healthy earth is a symphony of processes, fungal networks breaking down organic matter, microscopic organisms converting nutrients into forms plants can absorb, the subtle chemistry of minerals released from weathered rock. There's a particular earthy sweetness unique to old gardens, where centuries of cultivation have created soils unlike any found in nature. Scientists have discovered that walking through green spaces where this rich soil microbiome thrives actually changes our brain chemistry, reducing stress hormones and enhancing cognitive function. Perhaps this is why I feel my thoughts clarifying with each step deeper into the forgotten paths. A splash of unexpected color draws me forward, a flowering shrub covered in blossoms of such vivid blue they seem almost artificial against the subdued greens and browns surrounding them. Mechanopsis botanicifolia, the Himalayan blue poppy, one of the most challenging plants to cultivate outside its native mountain habitat. Its presence here tells me that whoever designed this garden possessed both extraordinary knowledge and stubborn determination. These poppies were first brought to Western attention by a French botanist who spent years searching Tibetan highlands before successfully collecting viable seeds in 1886. Legend says local guides warned him against taking the sky flower, believing it belonged exclusively to the mountain spirits. When he fell to his death in a ravine shortly after sending the seeds to Paris, many considered it divine retribution for his theft. The garden unfolds around me in layers, revealing its story through both what remains and what has disappeared. Here, a geometric pattern of low boxwood hedges still maintains a ghost of its original form, though gaps have appeared where individual plants succumb to disease or extreme winters. There, a stone-lined pond now serves as a shallow basin for rainwater, hosting a miniature ecosystem of algae, insects, and a single vigilant frog that watches my approach without blinking. Most striking are the trees, massive specimens that have outlived not only their planters but perhaps several generations of human caretakers. An enormous Lebanon cedar spreads its layered branches like protective arms over younger growth. Beneath, such trees were often planted as seedlings to commemorate births or marriages, living timestamps intended to grow alongside human legacies. One of the most fascinating aspects of historical gardens that few people appreciate is their role as early pharmaceutical factories. Before synthetic medicines, gardens like this one served as living pharmacies where healing plants were cultivated with the same care modern laboratories devote to producing medications. I pass a patch of foxglove, digitalis, whose heart-regulating compounds still form the basis of crucial cardiac drugs today. Nearby grows valerian, whose roots treat anxiety and insomnia, and feverfew, whose leaves prevent migraines. The gardeners who tended these plants were often women whose knowledge of herbal medicine was passed down through generations, their expertise rarely recorded in official medical texts, yet essential to community well-being. A particularly unusual section appears ahead. Plants arranged not by aesthetic consideration, but by geographical origin. This botanical theater attempts to recreate ecosystems from different continents in miniature, each bed a stage for flora from Africa, the Americas, Asia, and Oceania. The practice became fashionable among wealthy European collectors in the 18th and 19th centuries, when plant hunting expeditions returned with species never before seen outside their native habitats. The cost in human lives was rarely acknowledged. For every celebrated botanist whose name was immortalized in Latin nomenclature, dozens of local guides, porters, and unnamed assistants perished in the pursuit of horticultural novelties. Even more obscure is the ecological impact of these collections. How many native ecosystems were disrupted or depleted to satisfy the collecting mania of distant enthusiasts? I rest on a stone bench positioned to capture what was once likely a carefully composed view. The seat itself tells stories. Smooth depressions worn by centuries of visitors, small patches of lichen forming constellations across its surface, a barely visible inscription now weathered to illegibility. Gardens like this one were designed not just for plants but for human contemplation, creating spaces where nature and human intention converged to evoke specific emotional responses. The bench's placement invites slower breathing, quieter thoughts, a different quality of attention than our daily lives typically demand. The afternoon light filters through leaves overhead, creating patterns of brightness and shadow that shift with each breeze. In this dappled illumination, I notice plants I missed earlier, shy species that prefer the garden's margins, volunteers that arrived without human assistance, survivors that have adapted to neglect in surprising ways. An entire history of resilience surrounds me, written in chlorophyll and cellulose rather than ink and paper. These plants and their ancestors have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, changes in climate, the transformation of landscapes by human hands. They carry within their DNA the memory of adaptations to challenges we can only imagine. As twilight approaches, the garden's scents intensify, a phenomenon botanists attribute to changing humidity and temperature, but which feels almost like intentional communication, the plants speaking more loudly as visual details fade. Jasmine releases its intoxicating sweetness, while nearby soil dampened by evening dew contributes mineral notes to the aromatic conversation. I wonder how many others have stood in this exact spot across centuries, inhaling these same scents, feeling this same momentary connection to both past and future through the continuity of growing things. Perhaps this is the deepest purpose of gardens. Not to display human mastery over nature, but to anchor us within cycles larger than our individual lives. To remind us that we are simultaneously significant and ephemeral in the grand patterns of existence. Darkness gathers now, transforming the garden once more. Plants become silhouettes, their specific identities dissolving into general forms. As I prepare to leave this forgotten place, I carry with me not just memories of what I've seen, but a sense of having been temporarily incorporated into something ancient and ongoing. A living history that continues to unfold in silent, green persistence long after its human architects have returned to dust. The museum's back rooms hold secrets the public never sees. I move carefully between stored canvases, my flashlight illuminating fragments of worlds created by hands long stilled. The musty scent of aged varnish mingles with the cooler notes of climate-controlled air, creating an atmosphere that feels suspended between times. My fingers hover near, but never touch, surfaces that have survived centuries of light, darkness, movement, and stillness. Each brushstroke contains evidence of its maker. Hesitations, corrections, moments of perfect confidence when the hand followed vision without doubt. I've spent decades studying these marks, learning to read the physical language of creation, even when the creator's name has been lost to history. The painting before me now bears only the attribution, unknown Flemish master, circa 1610, a ghostly identity assigned by scholars who recognized the technical brilliance but could find no signature, no documented commission, no clear connection to any named artist of the period. The canvas depicts a kitchen scene, a table laden with game birds, fish, and overripe fruit, a maid working in the background, light falling through an unseen window to illuminate copper pots with an almost supernatural glow. The level of detail is extraordinary. Individual scales on the fish reflect light differently. Each feather on the pheasant bears the subtle iridescence of life. Even the flies drawn to the fruit are rendered with scientific accuracy. I adjust my light to examine the lower corner, where pentimenti, changes the artist made during the painting process, revealed that the maid's position was shifted slightly during creation. These hidden adjustments fascinate me more than the finished image itself. They capture moments of decision, of dissatisfaction, of reaching toward a vision that existed only in the creator's mind. The word pentimento comes from the Italian pentirsi, to repent, as though the artist's changes were a kind of visual regret, a correction of earlier mistakes. But I prefer to see them as evidence of the constant dialogue between intention and execution, the negotiation between what the mind envisions and what the hand can manifest. The mystery of anonymous masterpieces has always drawn me. How does it happen that works of extraordinary skill become separated from their creators? Sometimes the explanation is mundane. Records lost in fires or wars, signatures obscured by later restoration attempts, works attributed to more famous names for commercial reasons. Other times, the anonymity was intentional. Many medieval artists considered signing their work an act of vanity, believing their talent came from God rather than personal genius. In East Asian traditions, artists often used seals rather than signatures, and over centuries, knowledge of which seal belonged to which artist could disappear, leaving the work without identifiable authorship. One of history's most poignant artistic mysteries involves the prehistoric cave paintings at Lascaux, Altamira, and other sites. Masterpieces created up to 40,000 years ago by artists whose names, languages, and cultures have vanished completely. Yet the artistic choices they made, the dynamic positioning of animals, the skillful use of the cave wall's contours to create dimension, the sophisticated mixing of pigments, reveal minds fully capable of aesthetic decisions that resonate with viewers millennia later. We know nothing about them as individuals, yet through their work, we recognize a shared humanity that transcends time's enormous gulf. I move to another stored canvas, this one attributed to Circle of Caravaggio, early 17th century. The dramatic contrast between light and shadow, chiaroscuro, immediately identifies the artistic lineage, but subtle differences in brushwork and composition prevented experts from attributing it directly to the master or any of his known followers. The painting depicts a young musician caught in a moment of concentration, fingers poised above instrument strings, face partly in shadow. The anonymous artist captured not just a figure, but a moment of suspended time. The breath before sound begins. What happens to an artist's spirit when their name becomes detached from their creation? Does something essential remain present in the work itself? Some energetic signature that communicates across centuries independent of historical identity? I've often felt this presence standing before certain anonymous works, a sense of direct communication that bypasses the contextual information art history provides. Perhaps this connection is even purer without the distraction of biography, allowing the work to speak entirely for itself, rather than through the filter of what we know about its creator. The Renaissance workshop system further complicates questions of artistic identity. Masterpieces attributed to single famous names, Botticelli, Raphael, Titian, often involved multiple hands at different stages of creation. Apprentices prepared panels and laid down background elements. Specialized assistants might paint. Standardized components like architectural details or drapery, with the master perhaps executing only faces or finishing touches. This collaborative approach challenges our modern concept of artistic genius as inherently individual. In many cases, paintings emerged from a conversation between multiple creators, some of whose contributions will never be properly recognized or distinguished from the documented master's work. A fascinating historical curiosity involves the invisibles. Women artists whose works were often attributed to their fathers, husbands, or brothers due to the social constraints that prevented them from receiving formal training or signing contracts. Artemisia Gentileschi fought successfully for recognition in her lifetime, but many others saw their contributions subsumed under male names. Scientific analysis now helps identify these hidden creators. Differences in brush handling, pigment, choices, or anatomical understanding can reveal the presence of multiple hands in supposedly solo works. One study of 17th century Dutch flower paintings found evidence suggesting up to 25% may have been partially or entirely painted by women, whose names never appeared on the works. The light in the storage room shifts as clouds pass over the skylights far above. I watch how the changing illumination transforms the painting before me. Certain elements emerging, others receding, the entire composition breathing with subtle changes of emphasis. The anonymous artist could never have controlled or predicted exactly how their work would be viewed across centuries, under different lighting conditions, by eyes shaped by experiences they couldn't imagine. Yet something of their original vision persists, traveling across time to create an experience in my mind that connects directly to theirs. My own work as a conservator places me in an intimate relationship with these forgotten creators. When I clean away darkened varnish or stabilize flaking paint, I become part of the artwork's physical history, my interventions joining the accumulated trace of all who have touched this object since its creation. In rare moments, I feel almost like a collaborator with the original artist, not changing their intention, but helping it remain visible, preserving the conversation between creator and viewer that might otherwise be lost to deterioration. There's a profound humility in this role, becoming a temporary caretaker in the much longer life of an artwork that will likely outlast me, as it has outlasted its maker. As my time in the storage room ends, I carefully replace the protective coverings over each painting. These anonymous works will continue their patient waiting for exhibition opportunities, for scholarly attention, perhaps even for the discovery of documentation that might finally attach a name to their creation. But whether identified or not, they remain powerful testaments to human creativity beyond individual recognition. reminders that the impulse to make marks that carry meaning transcends the temporary identities we inhabit. In their silence and their eloquence, they speak to something that persists when names fade and bodies return to dust. The conversation between eyes, hands, and hearts that art makes possible across the boundaries of time. The first notes rise hesitantly in the darkness, a single voice testing the night air. Then another joins, and another, until the melody weaves itself into something stronger than any individual thread could be. I sit near the edge of the circle, watching firelight dance across faces transformed by song. The flames cast flickering shadows that seem to move with the rhythm, as though the fire itself is listening, responding to this ancient conversation between human voices and the night. My own voice finds its place in the harmony, a participation that requires no conscious thought. My body remembers melodies I've never been taught. There's something primal about singing around fire that reconnects us to the deepest human experiences. Archaeological evidence suggests that our ancestors gathered around flames, not just for warmth and protection, but for the communal reinforcement that shared music provides. The earliest known musical instruments, flutes carved from vulture and mammoth bones found in German caves, date back over 40,000 years, suggesting that music might be older than organized agriculture or even permanent settlements. Long before we built cities or created written language, we sang together in the darkness. The song changes now, shifting into a minor key that sends a different vibration through my chest. I feel rather than hear certain tones, the lower registers, creating physical sensations that connect me to the others in the circle without need for words. This embodied experience of sound is something recordings can never fully capture. How vibrations pass directly from one human body to another, through shared air, how singing together synchronizes breathing and heart rates among participants. Studies have shown that when people sing in groups, their heartbeats gradually align, creating a physiological unity that might help explain why communal music making appears in every known human culture throughout history. An elderly woman begins, a verse I haven't heard before, her voice carrying the slight rasp of decades lived fully. Everyone grows quieter, recognizing the emergence of something rare, a variant of the song preserved only in her memory, perhaps one her grandmother taught her, which her grandmother learned from hers in an unbroken chain stretching back into unrecorded time. Before writing fixed our stories into unchanging forms, songs served as living archives, preserving historical knowledge, practical wisdom, and cultural values. The Iliad and Odyssey began as sung poems, memorized and performed, by specialized singers who maintained their vast complexity through purely oral means. The Finnish epic Kalevala contains spells and practical knowledge about natural medicine encoded in rhythmic patterns that made them easier to remember and transmit accurately. The firelight catches the tear tracks on the old woman's cheeks as she sings, emotion flowing as freely as melody. I'm struck by how different this is from modern musical performance, where audiences and performers maintain careful separation. Here the distinction blurs. Everyone both creates and receives. Everyone's emotional response becomes part of the musical experience itself. This integration characterized music making for most of human history. The Pygmy peoples of Central Africa practice polyphonic singing where no single person leads. Instead, the community creates interlocking vocal parts so complex that ethnomusicologists initially believed they were hearing instruments rather than voices alone. This music functions not as entertainment, but as a means of maintaining social cohesion. There is no word for music as a separate category in their language, because sound making is woven into everyday life. Someone adds percussion, striking two stones together with surprising precision. The rhythm locks in with our heartbeats, and suddenly the music feels more urgent, more alive. This connection between pulse and rhythm has neurological foundations. Our brains entrain to regular beats, synchronizing neural firing patterns to external sound stimuli. Ancient cultures intuited this connection, using drums to create altered states of consciousness for healing and religious ceremonies. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia used frame drums not just for musical purposes, but as cosmological maps. The drum's surface decorated with symbols representing the three levels of existence. When played, the vibrations animated these realms, creating a sound bridge between everyday reality and spiritual dimensions. As the night deepens, the songs shift from energetic to contemplative. A man across the fire begins a melody so old that its words have evolved away from contemporary language, preserving phonetic sounds whose original meanings have been lost. Yet everyone sings along, maintaining a sonic artifact whose significance now transcends literal understanding. This phenomenon appears worldwide, in the throat singing of Tuvan herders, in Gregorian chant, in the call of the muezzin, sounds preserved for their vibrational properties even as their semantic content transforms or disappears. The Norse tradition of kulning, high-pitched herding calls used to summon livestock across vast mountain landscapes, continued for centuries after other aspects of Viking culture faded, the practical necessity maintaining a distinctive, vocal technique that would otherwise have vanished. The fire has burned lower now, red embers glowing among ash. Someone adds new wood, sending sparks spiraling upward like ephemeral stars. This visual counterpoint to our music reminds me how deeply intertwined sensory experiences were in pre-modern times. Before electric lighting separated visual from auditory stimulation, music was almost always experienced in relationship to fire. Its shifting illumination, its warmth, its distinctive crackling providing rhythmic undertones. Classical Indian ragas were designed to be played at specific times of day, many corresponding to the lighting conditions of sunrise, midday, or dusk. Aboriginal songlines encoded not just melodies, but entire maps of Australia, the rising and falling tones mimicking the actual landscape travelers would encounter. Our ancestors understood that music didn't exist in isolation, but as part of a complete sensory engagement with environment. A child falls asleep against her mother's shoulder, lulled by melodies that have served this purpose for countless generations. Lullabies may be among our oldest musical forms. Archaeological evidence suggests singing to infants dates back to prehistoric times, and the specific musical features of lullabies, slow tempo, falling pitches, simple repetitive patterns, appear consistently across vastly different cultures. The evolutionary advantages are clear. Singing soothes both infant and caregiver, strengthens attachment bonds, and introduces language patterns in a form the developing brain readily absorbs. What interests me most is how these intimate songs, passed from parent to child in private moments, somehow maintain remarkable consistency across centuries, despite never being formally taught or recorded. The night grows later, and our singing softens, voices becoming husky with use and emotion. In this gentle sonic space, barriers between past and present seem to thin. I feel the presence of all who have ever sat around fires singing. Paleolithic humans in cave mouths watching for predators, Greek symposium participants passing the lyre among friends, medieval peasants after harvest, nomadic tribes marking seasonal migrations. Despite vast differences in language, circumstance, and belief, they share with us this fundamental human experience. Voices joining together in darkness, finding in communal sound a confirmation of belonging that transcends individual existence. As the final notes fade into silence, no one speaks immediately. The song seems to linger in the air around us, in our bodies, in the space between. This moment, the hushed aftermath of shared music, might be as ancient as the singing itself, a necessary reintegration of individual consciousness after the temporary dissolution that harmony creates. I watch embers pulse orange then darken, their light diminishing, but their heat persisting. Like the songs themselves, visible manifestations may fade, but their warming influence continues in ways both evident and invisible, shaping how we understand ourselves and our connection to others across the vast distances of time and space. The map unfurls beneath my hands, edges curling slightly as ancient parchment remembers its original form. I smooth it gently, placing small weights at the corners to hold it open. The surface is a testament to human imagination. Coastlines flow into unexplored territories, mountain ranges rise in careful hatching, and in distant corners where knowledge fails, fantastic creatures swim through illustrated seas. My fingers trace the faded ink lines, feeling subtle indentations where a mapmaker's tool once pressed, with certainty or hesitation. Each mark tells two stories: what was known and what was dreamed. The scent of aged parchment rises around me, a complex perfume of animal skin, mineral pigments, and the accumulated dust of centuries. Maps carry their histories in their materiality. This one still bears a faint saltiness, evidence of an ocean crossing long ago when it guided ships through waters it attempted to describe. I lean closer, examining the precision of coastal details that gradually dissolve into conjecture as they extend into regions no European had visited when this document was created. The cartographer's hand becomes more expressive here, more artistic, as though the freedom from factual constraint unleashed a different kind of creativity. What most people don't realize about historical maps is how they function simultaneously, as scientific documents and works of art, practical tools and philosophical statements. The mapmaker balanced meticulous observation with visual storytelling, technical skill with aesthetic judgment. The colors before me, faded now but once vibrant verdigris green, vermilion red, gold leaf for particularly important features, weren't chosen merely for decoration, but as a sophisticated visual language that conveyed hierarchies of information. The blue wash of oceans deepens near shorelines where waters were known to be treacherous, a warning embedded in pigment rather than words. I examine the elaborate compass rose in the corner, its 32 directional points radiating outward, like a frozen explosion of possibility. More than mere orientation, these roses were signatures of their creators, showcasing individual artistic styles while serving essential navigational functions. The Italian cartographer Battista Agnese, working in Venice during the 1500s, developed such a distinctive style for his compass roses, with delicate gradations of color and precise geometric patterns, that scholars can identify his works without needing to see his signature. This anonymous rose before me bears similarities to his approach, though certain flourishes suggest a different hand, perhaps a student or competitor working in the same tradition. The space between known and unknown territories fascinates me most. Here, in this transitional zone where verified observation meets speculation, the mapmaker faced a profound challenge: how to represent what might exist beyond the boundaries of confirmed knowledge. Some chose to leave these areas blank, an honest acknowledgement of ignorance. Others filled them with theoretical landscapes based on travelers' accounts, mathematical principles, or philosophical assumptions. The ancient Roman geographer, Ptolemy, believed land must balance sea in the global sphere, leading to his prediction of a vast southern continent long before Antarctica was discovered. His theoretical Terra Australis appears on maps for centuries, shifting shape and position but persisting as possibility before becoming reality. My fingertip finds a curious notation near what we now call the Indian Ocean, a small island labeled with arabesque script and surrounded by minuscule depictions of birds. This references a persistent medieval belief in the existence of paradise birds that floated eternally on air currents, never touching earth until death, because they lacked feet. When actual specimens of birds of paradise reached Europe from New Guinea in the 16th century, native traders had indeed removed their feet during preservation, seeming to confirm the ancient legend. Maps like this one preserved such beliefs alongside accurate geographical knowledge, creating documents that mixed observable truth with inherited mythology in ways that made perfect sense to their contemporary users. The most poignant aspect of historical map-making lies in the intimate relationship between the cartographer and spaces they often never personally visited. Map-makers dreamed landscapes into existence through a complex synthesis of travelers' accounts, astronomical observations, mathematical projections, and cultural assumptions. They created visual arguments about the nature of the world, establishing hierarchies, claiming territories, and determining what deserved representation and what could be omitted. When the 16th century Mercator projection enlarged Europe and shrank landmasses near the equator, it wasn't merely a technical solution to navigational problems, but a perspective that centered European experience, influencing how generations conceptualized global relationships. I carefully turn the map to examine its margins, where the maker's personality often emerges most clearly. Here, tiny illustrations populate the territories beyond reliable knowledge. A camel caravan crossing desert wastes, mountains where diamonds were said to lie exposed on snow-covered peaks, kingdoms ruled by figures drawn from biblical and classical traditions. One illustration shows a woman measuring the stars with primitive instruments, perhaps representing the mathematical principles behind the map's creation, or the allegorical figure of astronomy herself. These marginal elements served practical purposes beyond decoration. They filled spaces where accurate information was unavailable, created visual memory aids for users, and connected new geographical knowledge to familiar cultural frameworks. The physical act of historical mapmaking required extraordinary patience and precision. Cartographers worked with implements that left little room for error: metal style for incising guidelines, quill pens with different nib widths for various features, brushes made from just a few squirrel hairs for the finest details. Colors came from crushed minerals, plants, insects. Ultramarine blue from lapis lazuli was so expensive it sometimes cost more than gold. The pigment called dragon's blood, a deep crimson resin harvested from certain tropical trees, appears on this map outlining important boundaries, its name evoking the dangerous nature of border regions, while its visual impact draws the eye to crucial divisions. As daylight fades, I light a small lamp beside the map, watching how the shifting illumination reveals different aspects of its surface: scratches where information was corrected, pentimenti showing altered coastlines. As knowledge improved, the subtle texture differences between areas drawn with certainty and those created with conjecture. I'm struck by the overwhelming optimism embedded in these historical documents, how they reach toward the unknown with such confidence, such belief in the human capacity to comprehend and represent the world's vastness. Each represents a moment when someone gathered all available knowledge, acknowledged its limitations, then proceeded anyway, creating frameworks that would guide others into territories they themselves might never see. I wonder, what does it mean to imagine spaces before encountering them? These mapmakers dreamed geographies into being through a peculiar alchemy of observation, mathematics, hearsay, tradition, and artistic intuition. Their works became self-fulfilling prophecies as explorers sought the lands depicted, sometimes finding what the maps promised, sometimes discovering realities that defied all expectation. Our modern minds, accustomed to satellite imagery and GPS precision, might view these documents as charming relics of ignorance, but I see them differently, as testaments to the human capacity to envision what lies beyond the horizon, to create frameworks of understanding that, however imperfect, allow us to venture into the unknown rather than remain safely within the boundaries of the familiar. The soil speaks to those who know how to listen. I kneel in the field at dawn, taking a handful of dark earth and bringing it to my face. I inhale deeply, closing my eyes to focus on the complex symphony of scents, the mineral tang of clay, the sweet decay of last season's growth, the promise of fertility that exists somewhere between life and death. This land has been cultivated for 17 generations, each farmer adding their understanding to the accumulated wisdom held in this soil. When I press my palm flat against the ground, I can almost feel the echo of countless hands that have made the same gesture before mine, testing, assessing, connecting. There's an intimacy to agriculture that industrial societies have largely forgotten, a physical relationship between human bodies and earth that shaped our species for thousands, of years before concrete and steel separated us from the ground. My fingers know the exact consistency this soil should have before planting. Not too wet or seeds will rot. Not too dry or germination will fail. This knowledge lives in my hands rather than my mind, a tactile wisdom passed down through years of working alongside those who worked alongside others, stretching backward through time in an unbroken chain of practice and observation. The earliest farmers in the Fertile Crescent some 12,000 years ago likely made this same gesture. Palms against soil, reading its readiness through touch. They didn't understand the chemistry or biology we now use to explain fertility, but they recognized patterns, developed practices, created relationships with specific landscapes that allowed human settlements to remain in place for generations. Before agriculture, our ancestors followed food sources, moving with seasons and animal migrations. The decision to stay, to invest in a particular piece of earth, to plant seeds with the faith they would mature months later. This transformed not just our diet, but our relationship with time itself. I stand and stretch, feeling muscles awaken after winter's relative rest. The cool morning air carries the scent of apple blossoms from the small orchard beyond the field. Trees planted by my grandfather's hands, now gnarled with age but still productive. Most commercial apple varieties today grow on standardized rootstock, producing predictable fruit but requiring constant human intervention. These heritage trees, propagated through centuries of careful grafting, contain diverse genetic material, nearly lost to modern agriculture. The Westfield Seek No Further variety blooming now was documented in Massachusetts in 1796, but likely existed for decades before being named. When these blossoms transform to fruit in autumn, their complex flavor, honey notes underlaid with a slight tartness, a hint of nutmeg in the finish, connects my taste buds directly to those of ancestors who bit into the same varieties centuries ago. Few people realize the profound revolution represented by seed saving, how it fundamentally altered our species' trajectory. The simple act of selecting which plants would reproduce, choosing seeds from the largest fruits, the most disease-resistant stalks, the earliest ripening varieties, allowed humans to reshape other species to meet our needs. Over generations, wild grasses with tiny, easily shattered seed heads became domesticated grains with larger, more nutritious seeds that remained attached until harvest. This coevolution happened through countless small decisions made by people, like me, kneeling in soil, making choices that would affect not just the next season's crop, but the genetic destiny of entire species. By some estimates, early corn cultivators in Mesoamerica transformed a wild grass called teosinte, with marble-sized seed clusters into recognizable maize in just a few thousand years, an eye blink in evolutionary time. I move along the field's edge, checking irrigation channels cleared last week in preparation for planting. Water management represents humanity's oldest continuous engineering tradition, with some systems in places like Yemen and China functioning effectively for over 3,000 years without significant modification. The simple gravity-fed channels before me follow contours barely perceptible to the eye, but crucial for even distribution of precious moisture. My great-grandmother reportedly could detect elevation changes of less than an inch, just by watching how water moved across land. Such observational skills, honed through necessity and practice, allowed effective agriculture long before modern surveying equipment existed. The sun rises higher now, warming the rich darkness of freshly turned earth. I bend again, running my fingers through soil prepared for planting. The texture has changed even in the past hour, slightly drier, more crumbly, ready to receive seed. This narrow window of optimal conditions explains why traditional planting seasons developed around shared community labor. When the moment arrived, everyone worked together to get seeds into ground that might be too wet or too dry just days later. The English term seed time captures this temporal specificity, a time defined not by clock or calendar, but by the confluence of temperature, moisture, day length, and soil conditions that experienced farmers recognized instinctively. A discovery that surprised modern researchers. Many indigenous agricultural systems intentionally maintained high biodiversity rather than emphasizing monoculture. The Andean farmers who domesticated over 3,000 potato varieties weren't being inefficient. They were creating resilience. By planting numerous varieties with different resistance profiles, moisture needs, and maturation times, they ensured that changing climate conditions might damage some crops, but rarely all. This strategy contrasts sharply with industrial agriculture's vulnerability, where single pathogens can devastate genetically uniform plantings. The Irish potato famine resulted not just from blight, but from dangerous dependence on a single, clonally propagated variety. The traditional farmers I learned from emphasized diversification, maintaining multiple crop strains as living insurance against unpredictable futures. I reach for the seed bag at my waist, feeling the weight of possibility it contains. Each seed represents both culmination and beginning, the result of thousands of years of selection and the potential for future abundance. There's something profoundly moving about this continuity. How my hands perform gestures essentially unchanged since agriculture began. The physical choreography of planting, the spacing of seeds, the depth of placement, the gentle covering of soil, connects me to every person who has ever participated in this ancient conversation between human intention and natural process. Modern agricultural science tends to frame farming as manipulation or control of nature, but traditional cultivators worldwide understood it differently, as relationship, reciprocity, mutual adaptation. Indigenous communities from the Amazon to Polynesia maintained practices that enhanced rather than depleted soil fertility over centuries of continuous cultivation. These systems viewed humans as participants in ecological processes rather than masters over them, recognizing that healthy crops required healthy relationships between all elements of the landscape: water, soil, pollinators, microorganisms, even seemingly unrelated wildlife. The fact that some traditionally managed lands show higher biodiversity than untouched wilderness challenges our conceptual separation between natural and cultivated environments. As the day progresses, I continue the rhythmic work of planting. Step, bend, place seed, cover, step again. My shadow shortens as the sun climbs higher, and sweat begins to dampen my shirt. There's a meditative quality to this labor, a falling into rhythm that allows deeper thoughts to surface. I consider how each seed contains instructions for transformation, how it will convert sunlight, water, and soil nutrients into new forms of life that will eventually become part of human bodies. This alchemy happens whether we understand its mechanisms or not, a partnership between human intention and natural processes that has sustained our species through millennia of change. My hands in this soil connect me to that continuous story, not as its author or owner, but as a temporary participant in patterns much older and larger than any individual life. Dusk gathers at the crossroads where I stand, the world suspended between day and night, between what was and what will be. The air holds a particular quality at this hour, neither warm nor cool, neither bright nor dark, but something in between that makes boundaries blur. I've always been drawn to these liminal spaces, these thresholds where certainty gives way to possibility. The ancient Romans believed that crossroads were magical places where different worlds might briefly touch, where travelers could encounter gods or spirits moving between realms. They built small shrines at such intersections, leaving offerings for Hecate, goddess of crossroads and transitions, who might guide them safely through their journeys. The worn stones beneath my feet bear the impressions of countless travelers who passed this way before me. If I press my hand against them, I can almost feel the vibrations of their passing. Merchants with laden carts, soldiers marching to distant campaigns, pilgrims seeking sacred destinations, ordinary people moving between villages now forgotten. Roads contain memories of all who have traveled them, creating channels not just through physical space but through time itself. The oldest paths often follow animal migrations that preceded human settlement, their routes determined by the wisdom of creatures following water, food, or safer passages through difficult terrain. When we walk ancient ways, we place our feet in patterns established by intelligences other than our own. Twilight deepens, bringing out the voices of night creatures beginning their activities as day dwellers retire. This transitional chorus, the overlap of diurnal and nocturnal sounds, creates an acoustic environment that exists only briefly each day. I listen to this changing of the guard, this handoff between different ways of inhabiting the same space. In many traditional cultures, twilight was considered a dangerous time, when boundaries between worlds grew thin and uncertain. The English word twilight itself comes from Germanic roots meaning between lights, not just a description of illumination, but an acknowledgement of being between states, between certainties. The crossroads extends in 4 directions, each path fading into darkness as it leaves the intersection. Which way leads forward and which back depends entirely on where one stands and where one wishes to go. Many mythological heroes encountered crossroads at crucial moments in their journeys. Oedipus meeting his unrecognized father at a 3-way intersection, setting in motion his tragic fate. Hercules choosing between paths of virtue and pleasure. Countless folktale protagonists meeting supernatural helpers at crossroads who offer advice or challenges. These stories recognize something fundamental about human experience. That life presents moments of choice where directions diverge, where the path taken defines not just where we go, but who we become. A curious archaeological discovery. At Achior, Roman crossroads, scholars have found unusual deposits of broken objects, pottery deliberately shattered, bent metal implements, perforated coins. These were not casual garbage, but intentional killing of objects, ritually breaking them to release their essence at these powerful junctions. Similar practices appeared independently across cultures, from ancient China to pre-Columbian Peru, suggesting a cross-cultural intuition about transitions requiring symbolic sacrifices. Something must be broken, surrendered, or transformed at thresholds before new journeys can begin. I think of this as I stand at my own crossroads, wondering what I must release to move forward. Stars appear overhead, first the brightest points piercing the deepening blue, then gradually the fainter lights joining the celestial tapestry. For most of human history, these patterns guided travelers when earthly landmarks disappeared in darkness. The consistency of stellar movements provided navigation not just through space but through time. The reappearance of certain stars marking seasonal changes, agricultural cycles, ritual moments. The ancient Egyptians based their calendar on the heliacal rising of Sirius, which coincided with the Nile's annual flooding. The Polynesians navigated vast Pacific distances using star paths memorized through chants and physical maps made of sticks and shells. These celestial relationships created continuity across generations, connecting ancestors to descendants through shared observation of the same cosmic patterns. A slight breeze carries the scent of distant wood smoke, reminding me that even in apparent wilderness, human presence leaves its trace. The history of humanity can be read as a network of crossroads, places where cultures met, clashed, or merged, where ideas traveled along with goods, where languages borrowed from each other, where genetic lineages intermixed. The Silk Road created such junctions across Asia, while maritime routes connected coastal civilizations for millennia before European colonial expansion. These exchanges weren't always peaceful or equitable, but they consistently produced cultural hybridization and innovation. Most of what we consider distinctly traditional to any region actually emerged from such crossroads encounters. Chinese porcelain techniques influenced by Persian designs. European musical instruments evolved from Middle Eastern origins. Culinary traditions incorporating ingredients that traveled between continents. The moon rises, nearly full, casting silver light across the landscape and creating new patterns of shadow that transform familiar terrain into something mysterious. This lunar illumination reveals the world differently than daylight does, emphasizing textures over colors, suggesting rather than defining, inviting imagination to complete what eyes perceive incompletely. Ancient calendars worldwide measured time by lunar cycles before solar calculations became dominant, recognizing in the moon's waxing and waning a natural metaphor for all cyclical processes: growth and decay, appearance and disappearance, life and death. Standing beneath this ancestral timekeeper, I feel my own existence as momentary and cyclical simultaneously, part of patterns that preceded me and will continue long after. Complete darkness has fallen now, but the crossroads remains visible in the moon's silver light. I've lingered here longer than intended, reluctant to choose a direction when each path offers different possibilities, different futures. Historic crossroads often developed into trading centers precisely because they gathered travelers who might otherwise never have met, creating exchanges not just of goods but of stories, ideas, and beliefs. The Greek agora, the Arabic souk, the American general store, all evolved at junctions where different paths converged, where strangers became temporary communities through shared pause in their separate journeys. Perhaps this is what draws me to this twilight place. Not just the symbolism of choice, but the gathering of possibilities, the convergence of stories, including my own. In this liminal space, this threshold between defined states, I can briefly perceive connections usually hidden by daylight certainties. The boundaries between past and present, between memory and imagination, between individual experience and collective history, all grow permeable in this between time, this between place where different realities touch and overlap. I choose a path finally, stepping from the crossroads into the silver-shadowed way ahead. But I carry with me the understanding that every point in life's journey functions as its own crossroads, each moment offering choices that determine not just where we go next, but how we interpret where we've been. The path behind recedes into darkness as I move forward, not erased but transformed by distance and perspective into memory, into story, into the foundation that supports each subsequent step into unknown territory that becomes known only through the act of traversing it. You've just listened to Memories from a Bomb Shelter, a sleep story from the series History for Sleep. This episode was written to be felt, not just heard. A story woven from silence, light, and shared breath. If this story brought you calm, comfort, or curiosity, you're warmly invited to return. New journeys into quiet history arrive each week, to dream again, to rest, to remember. Leave a gentle word in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from. You are not alone here. Until next time, sleep softly, and may the past keep you safe tonight.